We're back yet again for an episode of the Fantasy Football Toolkit, brought to you here by the 360 Sports Network, 3S Network on Twitter, 360sportsnetwork.com. I'm James Dotson. This week on the Toolkit, we're looking at some different tools that you can use as a fantasy football commissioner to make your league just a little bit more exciting, and honestly, just to make it different from all the ones out there. Because if your league is the same as everybody else's, what's the catch? Why am I going to come and join your league? Yes, I know everybody has their, cool draft location. We're going to, this bar or gonna eat this food or have some party or whatever. Or maybe you just have a standard online league. Doesn't matter what it is. If you don't have the excitement going out through the course of the year, the fantasy year, then it doesn't matter how great your draft day is. You need to have something that keeps people coming back, not only for the draft day, but for the entire year. So what we want to look at today is some different ways that you can incorporate the PPR, the point per reception, into your fantasy league. Now, for you fantasy newbies out there, PPR means points per reception. It's just a way to kind of balance a little bit some of your, third down backs, your pass-catching running backs, from your big power backs who just run it over and over and over again. A Danny Woodhead can almost be as valuable in a point per reception league as an Alfred Morris, even though Morris is out there for 90% of the snaps and Woodhead on his team for only about 30% of the snaps. It's a very intriguing way and can end up being a huge strategy ploy, even for the receivers. It might be better off to get a guy who's going to get close to 100 catches rather than a guy who could score 15 touchdowns. As weird as it sounds, it can end up working that way. Most leagues I see give a half of a point for a reception. So what that means is if you're getting 10 points or 10 yards to get 1 point, you're getting, say, 1 reception is only a half a point. 2 receptions is the same as 10 yards, essentially. And that's the way I look at it, because there's so many different ways to do a league. The one league that I'm in technically is PPR, but it ends up being that a reception is the exact equivalent as 1 yard. So it's not exactly much. It'd be in a standard league a tenth of a point, 0.1 points PPR. So it's very different whether you have a full point PPR versus something like that, a tenth of a point PPR. But manipulating that from one way to the other can end up being a huge way to adjust how your league is run, how your guys and the people in your league like to draft your league. Another thing that's really cool, though, that I've just heard a lot of leagues trying it out, and I'm thinking about trying it out in one of mine as well. It's a variable points per reception. And what I mean by that is it's different for each position. For example, the wideouts are expected to be catching the most passes. They're only going to get a half of a point for a reception. The running backs, well, you have some who catch it, some who don't, but definitely not as much as the wide receivers. So for them, if they get a catch, I'm going to make it a full point points per reception, a full point PPR for them. The tight ends, a lot of them don't get a lot of catches. I'm going to bump it up even more. I'm going to make it a point and a quarter or even a point and a half for them to get their when they get their receptions. So I've seen it a half, a full, and a point and a half. I've seen it like 1, 1 and a quarter, 1 and a half for those 3 positions. Or even just the running backs and tight ends being equal at a point and a quarter versus a point solid straight up for a wide receiver. There's lots of different ways that you can set this up, but the main thing you're looking at here is just trying to give you a little bit of a different insight into how to run your league. Because, for example, if you do that first example where you have the 1.5 points for a tight end catching a pass, I mean, look at guys like Gronkowski or Olsen, who are almost catching as many passes as the top receivers out there, like the Edelmans of the world, or Antonio Brown or Odell Beckham. I mean, you're talking 90 to 100 catches pretty easily for any of those guys. How much more valuable is it getting a point and a half for every one of those catches versus just a single half point for a wide receiver? So that can end up vaulting a Gronkowski or even an Olsen or a Jimmy Graham easily up into first round, high first round potential. So it just really shakes everything up and makes you have to think about it. Now, another thing that actually this began for me in a league where this was actually a complete mistake. One league setup, they accidentally made, instead of a half-point PPR, they made it a half-point per rushing attempt. Think about that for a minute. You are putting so much emphasis on your running backs now when you're getting a half a point for every rushing attempt. It was, very unintentional when it happened, but if you're paying attention and you see that that's how the league was set up, that can totally adjust how you're going to run your draft. Again, normally your PPR type running backs like the Woodheads of the world or the Darren Sproles are guys you'd like to have, but not in this case at all. The only guys you want are guys who are going to run it over and over and over again. Even guys maybe like Jonathan Stewart, who aren't going to get you many yards. They normally don't look good in a standard fantasy format. But as soon as you're giving them points every time they touch the ball, man, that's just huge. So that can be a huge benefit, and that can help balance the factor and make almost any starting every down running back just as valuable, whether they're going to score touchdowns or not, whether they're going to get the yards or not. And then the one that I've had the most fun with was a points per completion league. Normally this deals with about a half point for every completion, so you're going to get a lot of points out of your quarterback. Now here's the thing, a lot of teams when they would see that are going to say, wow, I'm getting 50 points per game on average from some of my quarterbacks. I need to get a quarterback immediately because that's so much higher than the rest of the positions. False. Don't go and rush out there and get a quarterback just because he's throwing it a lot, because really all quarterbacks are going to throw a lot, and they're not going to get that big of a discrepancy between quarterback and the other positions just in terms of your innate value, and meaning by that your number 1 quarterback versus your number 12 quarterback, the last starting quarterback. It's not as big of a difference as you might think, but at the same time that can completely change your strategy around. For example, people who weren't thinking about that as much, a couple years ago, I took, with the number probably 3 overall pick, I took Drew Brees, who was throwing the ball 10 million times during the course of a year. Well, the 5th round came around. Well, here's my thought process. Let me backtrack. My thought process in this was, do I take Brees with pick number 4, or do I hope that Matt Stafford, who was also throwing it way too many times at that point in his career, or do I hope that Stafford hangs around to the end of the 2nd round during my next pick? Well, I took Brees. I played the safe route, and I'm glad I did, except, Stafford did hang around in the 2nd round. Oh well, I could have had it. It is what it is. 3rd round, Stafford's still there. Wow. 4th round, Stafford's still there. You got to be kidding me. 5th round, when Stafford was still there, I said, forget it. I'm going to take him right now because I'm going to use that as trade bait. People weren't thinking about that points per completion. Half of the people didn't even realize it was points per completion. So again, like we always say, know your league, but at the same time, that can change your draft strategy and can make your team a lot better, either by, doubling up and using it as trade bait like I did. I ended up gaining a 1st round pick the following year when I traded away Matt Stafford, even though I got him in the 5th. So you can look at it in any way possible to help make your team better, not only for this year, but also for next year. But at the same time, think about all the animosity that would go down when somebody traded their 1st round pick to get a quarterback. Yeah, it was fun having 2 1st round picks that next year, let me just tell you that. So using this variable points per reception or throwing in the idea of a points per completion or points per rush can be just an absolute bomb way to make your league just that much more interesting and honestly memorable, because I talk about this league more often than any of my others. Well, there you have it. Another episode of the Toolkit is in the books. Make sure you keep checking back to 360sportsnetwork.com for more Toolkit episodes and more fantasy updates as this year progresses. Good luck in all your drafts out there. Have a good night.